I want you to remember this date, February 4th, 2026, because something cracked today that you need to understand. Not broke, not shattered, but cracked. And in American politics, cracks are how light gets in or how everything falls apart. We will not know which for months, maybe years, but the crack happened today. And I am going to show you exactly what it means. Here is what you need to know right now. President Donald Trump, in an interview that aired today on NBC News, said 8 words that stopped political analysts across the spectrum cold. 8 words that contradict everything this president has said, everything he has built his brand on, everything his supporters love him for. 8 words that his critics never expected to hear. He said, I learned that maybe we can use a softer touch from Donald Trump. Now, before we go any further, I need you to understand the significance of that sentence. Not because you like Trump, not because you dislike him, not because of anything you believe about his policies or his character. That sentence matters because Donald Trump does not say things like that. Think about the Trump you have watched for the past decade, the Trump who built a campaign on the promise that he would never apologize, never back down, never show what he considers weakness. The Trump who told his supporters that the only way to deal with opponents is to hit them 10 times harder. The Trump who, when criticized for anything, responds not with reflection, but with attack. That Trump does not use the word softer. That Trump does not talk about touch. That Trump views any acknowledgement of error as surrender, any modulation of tone as defeat. So when he says it anyway, you have to ask the only question that matters. What happened that was powerful enough to make Donald Trump betray his own brand? The answer is written in blood, and it started in Minneapolis 45 days ago. But we are not going to start there. We are going to start at the end and work backward, because that is how you understand what today actually means. This morning, 700 federal immigration officers began leaving Minnesota. 700. Gone, pulled out of an operation that the White House has called essential to national security, removed from a city that the administration just weeks ago threatened to occupy with military force under the Insurrection Act. Tom Homan made the announcement. If you do not know who Tom Homan is, you need to, because he is the face of what is happening in American immigration policy right now. He started his career as a deportation officer in the 1980s. He worked his way up through the ranks of what was then the Immigration and Naturalization Service. Under Obama, he ran ICE's enforcement operations. Under Trump's first term, he became the acting director. And when Trump returned to office, Homan came back as the so-called border czar, the public face of the mass deportation agenda. Homan is not a man who uses soft language. He is not a man who signals retreat. In congressional testimony, in television interviews, in press conferences, he projects certainty and aggression. He once said that anyone in the country illegally should be worried, should look over their shoulder. He has defended every tactic the administration has used as necessary and justified. So, when Tom Homan stands at a podium in Minneapolis today and says the words he said, pay attention. We're not surrendering our mission, he said. We're just making this more effective and more smart. Effective and smart. Those are the words he chose. Not aggressive, not dominant, not overwhelming force. The vocabulary itself has shifted, and vocabulary in politics is never accidental. Now, here is what you need to hold in your mind as we go through this. 2 things can be true at the same time. The administration can be pulling back while insisting it is not pulling back. Trump can be softening while claiming to be tough. Politics lives in the space between what is said and what is done. And right now, that space is wider than it has been in months. So let me take you back. Let me show you exactly what forced this moment. January 7th, a Sunday, Minneapolis. The temperature is below 0. Wind chill makes it feel like -20. The streets are empty because no one goes outside in Minneapolis in January unless they have no choice. Federal agents are patrolling those streets. They have been there since late December, when the Trump administration launched what it calls Operation Metro Surge. The concept is concentration. Instead of spreading immigration enforcement across the country, you flood a single city with resources. You make it impossible for undocumented immigrants to move freely. You create such pressure that they leave before you have to force them out. Minneapolis was chosen for reasons that are partly strategic and partly political. It is a sanctuary city, meaning local law enforcement does not cooperate with federal immigration authorities. It is run by Democrats in a state that went blue in the last two presidential elections, and it has a large Somali immigrant population that has been a target of political rhetoric for years. On this night, federal agents encounter a woman named Renee Nicole Good. Renee Good is 37 years old. She is a mother. She is an American citizen, born in this country, with every right and protection that citizenship provides. She is not an immigrant. She is not undocumented. She is an American in her own neighborhood on a freezing January night. What happens next remains disputed. The official account, released by the Department of Homeland Security within hours, says that Good confronted the agents, that she was aggressive, that she posed a threat sufficient to justify deadly force. Renee Good is dead by the time the sun rises on January 8th. Here is what happens in the hours that follow. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem goes on television. She does not express sympathy for a family that just lost a loved one. She does not call for patience while an investigation proceeds. Instead, she says that Renee Good attacked federal officers. She implies that Good was involved in domestic terrorism. The word she uses, repeatedly, is justified. This is the pattern. Learn it, recognize it, because you will see it again and again. When federal force results in death, the victim is immediately recharacterized as a threat before evidence is presented, before an investigation concludes, before anyone outside the administration has a chance to examine what happened. The narrative is set, and in the chaos of breaking news and rapid reactions, that initial framing often becomes the permanent story. For 17 days, it works with Renee Good. Her name fades from headlines. The operation continues. More agents arrive in Minneapolis. More raids occur. The official line holds. Then comes January 24th. Alex Pretti is also 37 years old. He is an ICU nurse at a Minneapolis hospital. Hold that fact in your mind. He is someone who chose as a career to be in the room when people are dying. He spent years learning how to fight for lives in the most extreme circumstances. He watched patients take their last breaths and did everything in his power to prevent it. On January 24th, Alex Pretti is killed by federal agents in Minneapolis. The administration's response follows the exact script it used for Renee Good. Armed struggle, dangerous individual, justified shooting. Kristi Noem again invokes domestic terrorism, but this time, something is different. This time, there is video. I am going to be careful here because the footage is disturbing, and I am not going to describe it in graphic detail. What I will tell you is what the video shows and what it does not show. It does not show an armed struggle. It does not show Alex Pretti attacking federal agents. It does not show the scenario the administration described in its initial statements. What it shows is a man surrounded by agents. It shows gunfire. It shows a body on the ground. The Hennepin County medical examiner rules the death a homicide. And now everything changes because video is different from words. Video is different from press releases. Video shows you what happened in a way that cannot be spun or explained away. The streets of Minneapolis fill with protesters. Thousands of people, night after night, demanding accountability. The National Guard is activated. Businesses close. Curfews are announced. The images broadcast across the country look like the summer of 2020 all over again. And behind the scenes, something else is moving. Poll numbers, survey data, the metrics that this White House watches more closely than anything else. Let me show you the numbers that changed everything. A Fox News poll conducted between January 23rd and 26th found that 52% of registered voters would support the Democratic candidate in their congressional districts if midterm elections were held today. That is the highest level of support Fox News has ever recorded for either party, ever. Another survey found that more than half of Americans have very little confidence in ICE. Trust in the agency at the center of the president's signature policy had collapsed. Internal Republican polling, the kind that party operatives conduct but do not share publicly, showed Minnesota becoming a liability, an anchor dragging down candidates in swing districts who had no good answers when asked about what was happening in Minneapolis. This is the context in which today happened. This is what the White House was seeing while publicly insisting everything was under control. This is why Trump sent Homan to take personal command, replacing the Border Patrol commander who had been running the operation. Let me tell you what they tried before they got to today. First, they tried doubling down. Vice President J.D. Vance called the protesters domestic terrorists. He framed any criticism of the operation as support for criminals and open borders. The message was clear. If you oppose what we are doing, you are the enemy. Second, they tried reframing the deaths. In the administration's telling, Renee Good and Alex Pretti were not victims. They were aggressors who faced consequences of their own making. Officials leaked information about their backgrounds, anything that might make the public believe they deserved what happened. Third, they tried attacking local officials. Governor Tim Walz and Mayor Jacob Frey were portrayed as radical obstructionists protecting criminals. The message was that if they had cooperated, none of this would have happened. None of it worked because video exists. When millions of Americans can see what happened with their own eyes, the narrative falls apart. It does not matter how many times the press secretary says justified. When the video shows something different, people believe the video. This is the power of documentation. This is why body cameras matter, why transparency matters, why the impulse to suppress evidence should alarm you regardless of your politics. Alex Pretti's death was documented, and that documentation made it impossible for the administration to move on. So here we are, February 4th, the day the president said, softer. But I need you to understand what softer actually means in practice, because this is where the sleight of hand matters. Listen to the full quote. "I learned that maybe we can use a little bit of a softer touch, but you still have to be tough. Softer, but still tough." This is the rhetorical maneuver. You concede in language while holding ground in action. You change the words while preserving the policy. The mechanism is conditions. Tom Homan made clear that the 700 agents leaving are a partial withdrawal, not a retreat. 2,000 federal officers remain in Minnesota. A complete drawdown will happen only if the state cooperates. And cooperation means local jails turning over undocumented immigrants to federal custody. It means protests ending. It means what Homan called attacks on agents stopping. In other words, the administration is not giving peace. It is offering a negotiation with terms that may be legally impossible to meet. Minnesota law prohibits jails from holding people beyond their release date solely because ICE requests it. Counties that have done so have lost lawsuits. The state attorney general has stated that complying with ICE detainers can violate the Fourth Amendment. When the administration says cooperate, they are asking Minnesota to break its own laws, to expose county sheriffs to legal liability, to create new battles in order to end the current one. This is not retreat. This is repositioning. The administration moves from aggressor to reasonable party. If Minnesota refuses, any future violence becomes Minnesota's fault. If Minnesota agrees, the administration gets what it wanted. It is chess, not surrender. But even chess tells you about the player. What today tells us is that Donald Trump responds to pressure, that he reads polls, that sustained public outrage, documented on video and reflected in data, can force change. That is valuable information, not because it means Trump has fundamentally changed, not because the immigration agenda is over, but because it means the mechanisms of democracy still function, however imperfectly, that protests matter, that documentation matters, that votes and the fear of losing them matter. The question now is what happens next. Congressional hearings are scheduled for next month. Officials from DHS, ICE, and Customs and Border Protection will testify before both the House and Senate Homeland Security Committees. Democrats are demanding answers. Some Republicans are asking questions too. Investigations into the deaths of Renee Good and Alex Pretti are ongoing. The Pretti family has retained attorney Ben Crump, who has experience with civil rights cases against law enforcement. Wrongful death lawsuits are expected. On the streets of Minneapolis, protesters who forced this moment are watching to see if softer means anything real. And here is what else you need to know, because this story does not exist in isolation. Last week, FBI agents raided a county election office in Georgia and seized ballots from 2020. The president's director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, was photographed at the scene despite having no authority over domestic law enforcement. Trump has called for Republicans to nationalize elections in states he considers corrupt. The same president, using softer in Minnesota, is pushing federal takeover of voting systems elsewhere. This is the duality. Softer in one place, harder in another. Retreat on one front, advance on another. This is who this president is. This is how this administration operates. Do not mistake today for transformation. Take it as data. Take it as evidence that pressure works when it is sustained and documented. Take it as information you can use as you decide what comes next. Renee Good was 37 years old, a mother, an American. Alex Pretti was 37 years old, a nurse who spent his life saving people. He will never save anyone again. They died during a federal operation that the president now says could be softer. They did not live to hear those words. Whether softer means anything depends on what happens to the next person who encounters federal agents. Whether it is policy or performance depends on the lawsuits, the hearings, the elections still to come. Watch what happens next. That is where the answer will be, not in words, in what follows.